Ever wonder what it's like to live in the shadows, feared by lords and whispered about in alleyways? Well, buckle up, because tonight we're diving into the gritty, blood-slicked world of medieval hitmen. And spoiler alert, it's way less cool Assassin's Creed, and way more lice, lies, and liver damage. If you think this job came with honor or flair, think again. So, before we wade into this murky pit of blades and betrayal, smash that follow or subscribe button if dark tales and lost legends are your vibe. Drop a comment to tell me where you're watching from and what time it is, because nothing says medieval madness like bonding with strangers across time zones. Now dim those lights, crank that fan for ambiance, and brace yourself. This won't be a gentle stroll through history, it's more of a quiet sprint with a knife. Let's clear something up from the start. Nobody in the medieval mess ever said, "You know what sounds fulfilling? Shanking a tax lord for a pouch of coins, then napping in a pig trough for 2 days. Becoming a blade for hire wasn't a childhood dream. It was what you did when the tavern kicked you out. Your debts outgrew your excuses, and your only marketable skill was not being seen. Forget the mysterious monastery training montages. Most night crawlers weren't stoic warriors. They were nobodies. Washed-up mercenaries, failed thieves with nimble fingers, or forgotten souls that society left behind. If you had a plot of land or even a semi-functioning mule, you were hiring someone to do the dirty work. But if you were crawling out of the sheriff's dungeon with rat bites and a glint in your eye, congrats. Someone just slid a coin pouch across a smoky table and whispered a name. And that name? Never pleasant. You weren't sent to handle quiet cobblers or retired shepherds. No, it was always some overfed duke with a fortress, or a gold-bloated bishop surrounded by guards and guilt. The coin promised was tempting the job. Less so. By the time you considered it, chances were you already had nothing to lose. No kin, no farm, no teeth, possibly. And perks? What perks? No retirement fund, no dramatic send-off, no silent Slayer of the Year trophy. You didn't exactly hang a sign outside your shack. Stealthy eliminations, discreet and deadly. You kept your mouth shut, your steps quieter, and your identity even quieter, especially in the pub. Oh, me? Traveling spice merchant. That stain? Paprika? No child dreamed of ending up an alley ghost with a blade and a target. You got there because life broke every part of you, then handed you a rusty dagger and said, "Try not to die before supper." You weren't the hero. You weren't even the story. You were the blurry figure in the background, gone before anyone asked questions, and usually before you saw your coin. Now, let's gut this first big myth like a fish. Medieval assassins weren't trained in secret caverns with flutes and wise mentors quoting philosophy. No soothing chants. No heartwarming mentorship arcs. Training? You survived long enough to stop dying poorly. These weren't elite ninjas with ancient scrolls. They were desperate humans with shaky hands and a decent memory for guard shifts. If you'd ever held a blade before, great, you were already ahead. If not, well, stabbing's mostly instinct. Escaping afterward, now that's where the artistry came in. There were no how-to guides, no morning pep talks from hooded trainers. You learned while scaling castle walls and hoping the bedroom you slipped into didn't belong to a squire with anger issues. Poison? Yeah, that was more guess and pray than science and precision. You could knock out a baron or give him an awkward case of the runs. Sometimes you poisoned yourself. Cheers to herbal roulette. Every so often, a lucky soul got tips from old thieves or mercs a trick to walk without creaking or how not to shine under moonlight. But mentorships were rarer than honest tax collectors. Why? Because assassins didn't retire. They disappeared, or got disappeared. Weapons training? Ha! You weren't twirling broadswords under moonlight. You were clutching a pilfered dagger with a chipped blade and praying it didn't bend mid-slice. Fancy gear? Maybe a garrote if you were professional, or whatever sharp thing you hadn't lost yet. You weren't a sleek martial arts legend. You were a grimy shadow with foot fungus and a habit of muttering to yourself in alleyways. Skills came from failure. You learned from each mistake, each escape, each botched job where your only takeaway was, Don't sneeze while hiding in wardrobes. Let's talk motivation. Why would anyone live like this? Money, obviously. Heavy, glinting, clink in your pocket silver. The hope of it was sweeter than honeyed wine. But the truth? Payment was as slippery as a noble's promise. You got half up front if you were lucky, and the rest once the deed is done. Translation: if we like the result, and you don't talk, and you don't survive long enough to ask questions, you risk everything's linked through sewers, gut a smug noble in his goose feather bedand return expecting reward. Instead, the client's gone, vanished, or worse, they send someone after you. After all, a knife in the back is cheaper than honoring a deal. Even if you got paid, it never felt enough. Not for the bruises, the body count, or the 3 days you spent curled up in a soggy haystack whispering your regrets to the rats. What did you get? A few coins and a nod. Maybe a muttered, "You weren't here." Oh, and here's a treat: some gigs were traps. Political bait. You'd get hired to eliminate a threat, only to find guards waiting in ambush. Welcome to the sting. And no, you couldn't sue. Your Honor, this backstabbing noble scammed me. The only judge you'd meet wore a black hood and carried a rope. So you learned, fast take the money first, trust no one, and remember that even the weasel-faced scribe who swore you were doing kingdom-saving work was probably setting you up. Being an assassin wasn't just a job, it was a countdown, and the clock was always ticking. Outside the crumbling fortress sat a crooked wooden sign that read in charcoal, "Nice try." Yep, welcome back. When you picture a medieval shadow slicer, you might see sleek black cloaks, leather gauntlets, and some dashing hood fluttering in moonlight, like a dramatic theater exit. Reality? You looked more like a sleep-deprived goat wrangler who lost a bet. Back then, disguises weren't fashionable, they were functional nightmares. You didn't strut in tailor-made cloaks or enchanted armor. You wore whatever didn't stink worse than you. Maybe a filthy monk's robe 2 sizes too big, or a guard's old uniform that still carried the scent of fear and onions. The goal wasn't style, it was anonymity. And anonymity, in those days, meant looking like someone nobody wanted to talk to. You blended in by smelling like you hadn't bathed in 3 seasons, limping like you'd been kicked by your own horse, and scratching your head like it owed you money. Suspicion wasn't about your hooded, it was about you nervously shifting your waistband to cover a dagger wrapped in cheesecloth. Masks? Forget them. No Guy Fawkes vibes here cover your face, and people assumed you had the plague. Good for solitude, bad for socializing. When the guards asked who you were, you had to improvise fast. "I'm Brother Norbert, here for candle counting and spiritual chimney inspections." And if you somehow bluffed your way past the threshold, you were in deep trouble. The castle staff weren't fools. They noticed when the new servant didn't know where the wine cellar was or couldn't remember the cook's pet chicken's name. If the disguise held, congrats. Now act like you belong. That meant spending hours pretending you weren't imagining plunging your knife into every arrogant noble strolling past. And wigs? Non-existent. If you wanted to look older, you rubbed dirt on your face, squinted a lot, and hoped nobody realized your beard was held on with tree sap. Truth is, your costume didn't protect you, it bought you maybe 5 awkward minutes. After that, you had to be smoke, charm, or already gone. Because no one wants to be the assassin caught in the Archbishop's bathhouse, wearing a laundress's apron and holding a short sword, especially not during a holy day. Now, let's talk teamwork, or the lack of it. If you thought medieval assassins had clever sidekicks with witty banter or potion-mixing friends in candlelit caves, think again. It was you, a rusting blade, and crippling anxiety. There were no guilds sending you on secret missions via wax-sealed scrolls. If rumors of a brotherhood of shadows existed, they were born in a drunken bard's imagination and died with the morning hangover. You were alone, because in your line of work, knowing people got you killed. The fewer names, the fewer funerals. Even your clients rarely knew who you really were, and if they did, you already had an escape plan involving a cart of turnips and a river. Companionship? That was comedy. Friends asked questions. Lovers noticed the bruises and the way you clutched your dagger in your sleep. You didn't settle down. You couldn't. One slip up in the market, and suddenly someone's shouting, "Hey, didn't you work for that duke who died mysteriously in his soup?" Then it's a full sprint to the nearest ditch. Even fellow criminals steered clear. Pickpockets, black market traders, they were chatty. You were the shadow people vanished around. They either feared you or saw you as a walking arrest warrant. No one invited the village assassin to dinner. And if you ever dared say, "I have a rough time sleeping after garroting a corrupt tax official," you'd be met with either dead silence or someone pointing toward the gallows. So you stayed quiet. You kept your secrets like your weapons clothes, hidden and never shared. At inns, you sat in the darkest corner, back to the wall, watching every creak of the door. Never too much drink, never more than one night. Names were a privilege you rarely gave out, and even then, it was likely made up on the spot. Being an assassin wasn't just a job. It was mastering the art of erasing footprints, friendships, even your own identity. Now imagine, you've taken the job. You studied your mark. You bribed the stable boy. You snuck in disguised as a soot-covered chimney sweep. And then, you froze. Maybe the target turned suddenly. Maybe they were tucking in a child. Maybe your nerves flared and your hand trembled like a leaf in a storm. Guess what? You're now dead. Failing a medieval hit didn't mean a bad Yelp review. It meant creative public executions featuring ropes, fire, spiked contraptions, and cheerful executioners with nicknames like the Wrist Snapper. You missed your mark, and suddenly you're the main act in this week's Town Square horror show. Even if your target didn't catch you, word would spread faster than plague. Someone tried to assassinate Lord Barkwin last night. Cue every guard in the region flipping your description to local taverns. Suddenly, your blurry likeness is nailed to every post, and you're the new prize pig in the bounty fair. And it wasn't just your victim you had to worry about. Your employer, if you botched the job, they saw you as a risk. What if you got caught? What if you talked? No way were they letting that happen. A second contract would go out, this time with your name on it. Second chances didn't exist. Oops, slipped a little, can I try again tomorrow? Number one shot, one chance. Miss it, and your new job was staying alive long enough to regret it. Failure didn't just mean death. It meant shame, the kind that wrapped around you like a cold shroud. You hadn't just failed to kill, you'd failed to disappear, to be the perfect ghost in the corridor. In this business, you weren't measured by your resume. Only your last job mattered. And if that last blade didn't find its mark, well, start sprinting. But let's say it worked. You got in. The knife slid between ribs with a silent whisper. No screams, no alarms. Just one very wealthy corpse hitting the floor. Congrats. Now run. Because the moment your dagger did its job, yours began. You weren't rewarded with champagne and rooftop views. You were slipping through alleyways, boots soaked in blood, chased by dogs who had your scent memorized. No celebration, no drink with your client, no high five from a mysterious handler in a tavern booth. Your new life started with locked gates, guards on full alert, and horses stabled inconveniently far away. You were likely injured, limping, bleeding, and running on fear and old bread. You had to plan the escape before the kill routes, fallback spots, maybe a sympathetic barge captain who owed you from that thing with the sheriff's goat. Because once the city locked down, it became a rat maze of soldiers with your face scribbled on parchment and the words, "Extremely stabby approach with sword." And the client? If they didn't plan to ghost you from the start, they sure were now. You'd proven too much, too capable, too dangerous. You could reach people no one else could. That's terrifying, especially to someone with secrets. So even when you succeeded, you didn't walk away richer. You walked away more hunted. You got your payment and a new bounty on your head. Congratulations. Time to find a new name, a new city, and a new barrel to hide in. Victory meant scraping by in haylofts, bribing guards, shaving in puddles, and calling yourself Brother Lucian, while marching east with a monk caravan. Because even when you won, the game restarted. Harder, meaner, louder. And that's if paranoia didn't get you first. Because medieval peasants didn't just fear assassins, they thought they were cursed. To the average yokel, you weren't a man. You were some cursed shadow being who could whisper to demons and vanish into smoke. People thought you smeared frog guts on your knives and howled at the moon. Why else could you sneak past guards and disappear in a blink? Logic wasn't popular, but fear? That was a cultural event. Villagers believed assassins could change shape, vanish in holy light, or breathe death through walls. You'd walk into a town and hear someone mutter, "Don't stare, he might hex the baby." Your gear? Definitely cursed. That dagger? Forged in a haunted forge. That poison? Clearly brewed with demon spit and cat bones under a crimson moon. Think this fear helped you? Think again. Superstitious mobs don't wait. They don't ask questions. They just light torches and yell, "Burn him before he summons a plague." Every mysterious death, your fault. Chicken bone mishap, Shadow Man did it. Card accident, assassin curse. Being nearby when someone sneezed too hard, hang him. So you kept moving, constantly, because staying still meant suspicion. And suspicion meant pitchforks, bells, and a priest yelling exorcism rites while villagers prepared to cleanse the evil. And heaven help you if you had herbs, foreign coins, or a weird accent. That's all it took to start a bonfire with you on it. They said you wore other people's faces, that you were too quiet, too clever, too quick to trust. In the logic of the medieval mind, someone like you wasn't dangerous, they were unnatural. And unnatural things had to be destroyed, preferably in the most public, flammable way possible. Poison, the so-called elegant weapon of the covert killer. No swords, no mess, just a sip, a cough, a quiet collapse. At least, that's the fantasy. In reality, trying to poison someone in medieval times was like entering a fistfight armed with garden herbs and sarcasm. First of all, poisons weren't reliable. No neat little vials labeled death, fast acting. You worked with mushrooms, berries, toads, maybe some crushed stone or questionable powder scraped from an alchemist's shelf. You picked, mashed, and hoped the stars were feeling cooperative that day. A wrong dose? Your target might end up with a sore stomach and a funny story. Or you could drop dead before the soup got cold. There were no scales, no measurements, just guessing. Too little? The noble cancels dinner and starts a crusade against shady apothecaries. Too much? You get dizzy halfway through dessert and fall face first into the fire pit. And let's not forget getting poison into someone's food wasn't exactly a walk in the herb garden. Kitchens back then were chaos. Huge, smoky, full of dogs and gossip. You had to either bribe a cook, disguise yourself as one, or sneak in during a moment of total mayhem. Even then, the food had more checkpoints than a royal treasure vault. Tasters, dogs, priests, sometimes even the local jester got a sniff. By the time it reached the Lord's plate, your carefully laced feast had been sniffed, blessed, bitten, and possibly swapped. And if the poison did go unnoticed, if the mark actually ate it well, get ready for unpredictability. Some poisons acted within minutes, others dragged out over days. 1 minute, your target's laughing about a wench joke. The next, they're puking up their innards and summoning their astrologer for answers. And guess who they blame? Not the cook, not the poor sap who fed the goat. Youth, quiet one, the one who knows herbs, the one with shaky hands and way too many cough remedies in his satchel. So no, poison wasn't the slick, stylish method it's made out to be. It was a gamble with your life as the stake. And if caught, you didn't get a swift blade to the neck. You got the rack, the Iron Maiden, and a stern gentleman with pliers asking if you poisoned every member of the Duke's extended family. Even if you pulled off the perfect kill silenced a tyrant, ended a dynasty, prevented a war you were forgotten, that was the job. You didn't leave signatures. You didn't get credit. You were a rumor, a story to scare nobles into hiring more guards. Some shadowy figure with dead eyes. That was the closest thing you got to fame. You could execute the most significant political hit of the century and still end up as unknown male, suspicious death in the local scroll. That was the point. Your client didn't want your name just results. The fewer people who knew who did the job, the safer they were, and the less chance they'd end up testing their own wine with a trembling hand. So your name? Gone. If you even gave one. You didn't take souvenirs. You didn't boast. You didn't exist. And if someone did know your real name, that was a mistake. A dangerous, short-lived mistake. There were no medals for silence, no statues for ghosts. Nobles built monuments for themselves. You got a box, maybe. If you messed up, a pike with your head on it and a sign that read, "Traitor." Sometimes your name lived on, but only as a whispered warning. Don't betray the crown. Remember what happened to Lord Elric? And the one who did it? Gone, like morning mist. You weren't remembered. You were erased. Let's say, against all odds, you survived. You completed the job. You even got paid a miracle worthy of a bard's ballad. Now you just need to lay low, stay quiet, and trust that the person who hired you won't turn on you. Yeah, no. Because in this shadow game, the most sacred rule was, never trust the hand that hires you. That bishop, baron, or merchant didn't hire you because they respected your skill. They hired you because they needed something dirty done, and you were the sharpest knife in the alley. But once the job was done, you became a threat. You knew things. You had answers. You were the breathing version of a liability. So what did they do? They erased you. They claimed they never met you, or they hired another killer to tie off the loose end you. There were cases where assassins were double booked, one to do the job, one to ensure the first one didn't live to tell about it. No refunds, just fewer risks. Try to blackmail a client? Bold move. Also, final move. Power in the Middle Ages didn't negotiate with threats. It stomped them. If your client had any shred of honoraire, like a dragon in a library, you might live. But even then, they probably kept tabs on you, sent someone to learn your habits, maybe memorized how you limped when tired. You were a secret. Secrets talk, secrets die. Success didn't earn loyalty, earned suspicion. Because if you could kill for them, you could kill them. And no one liked that kind of power roaming free. Let's say you beat all the odds. Survived the missions, the betrayal, the paranoia. You made it. You outlived your enemies and your conscience. What now? Retire? Hilarious. In the Middle Ages, no one handed assassins a pension and a cottage by the lake. No medals, no banquets, no end credits. You either vanished or you died, usually both. You couldn't just walk away. Not with that many secrets buried under your skin. People didn't want you retired. They wanted you erased. Even if no one came hunting, and that's a huge if you lived with a target on your back. Somewhere, some fresh-faced blade for hire might have been paid to find a man with a strange gait and a habit of avoiding eye contact. Sound familiar? So you ran. Again, new name, new town. You told people you were a healer, or a traitor, or a retired soldier who'd lost his memory in a war no one remembered. You sold herbs, avoided markets, and never got drunk. You kept your dagger beneath the floorboard, next to a pouch of silver that still smelled like betrayal. But you didn't trust yourself anymore. Years of killing had rewired your brain. Every knock startled you. Every stranger made you sweat. You didn't dream. Dreams brought faces. Faces brought guilt. You couldn't love, couldn't rest, couldn't laugh. You existed like a wraith wrapped in skin, pretending to be a man. There was no sunset ride into peace. Just an endless loop of paranoia, waiting to be forgotten. And eventually, you were. One day, you simply disappeared, and no one noticed. Which, ironically, was probably the happiest ending you could have hoped for. So now you see it. The truth of being a medieval assassin? It wasn't thrilling. It wasn't poetic. It sure wasn't profitable. It was brutal, lonely, and short. A career soaked in risk, dread, and silence. You wouldn't survive on a day. You'd expect mystery and control. What you'd get is hunger, cold, and a castle guard named Osric chasing you through goose droppings. You'd make the wrong move, stab the wrong target, get recognized by a stable hand with a good memory, and then run. But you're not built for this. Not the mud, not the mistrust, not the mobs, the betrayal, the weight of history, forgetting your name. Because this life, it was never about glory. It was about erasing yourself, one silent job at a time. No legacy, no peace, just darkness, and the hope it swallowed you before anyone else could. Now, are you still sure you'd want to be the shadow behind the throne? They said her blood hummed with prophecy, that her spirit danced with shadows older than kings. But one thing was absolutely clear. This was not a woman built to fade quietly into the footnotes of history. From the moment she could walk, young Lysandra was immersed in rites, riddles, and relics. Her childhood wasn't stitched from lullabies and lullabies, but shaped by shrines, ecstatic chants, and cryptic visions. Her world revolved around divine chaos, not courtly calm. She wasn't the kind of royal girl who giggled while stitching flowers into linen. No, Lysandra was drawn to serpents, omens, and the wild moonlit rites of the Dionian cult. This was where women danced barefoot beneath the stars, channeling gods through trembling limbs and fevered eyes. For her, worship wasn't performative, it was blood deep. She didn't kneel before the gods. She became their vessel. Ancient scrolls, likely penned by men who feared as much as they fantasized, claimed she slept beside sacred snakes, letting them coil beside her like divine lovers. Maybe it was true, maybe it was slander, but either way, it stuck. To some, she was God-touched. To others, she was monstrous. Her power didn't begin in a council hall or battlefield. It started in firelight and whispers, in the eerie flicker of torchlit caves where priestesses swayed like smoke and serpents twisted around their limbs. She wasn't a girl of politics, she was prophecy personified. So when King Damarian of Myratia, ruthless, brilliant, and famously allergic to celibacy, visited the island of Theranos for a sacred initiation, he didn't just meet a royal maiden. He encountered a riddle wearing a crown of ivy. Their union wasn't just diplomaticit, was mythic. Lightning reportedly split the sky on their wedding night. Others claimed Lysandra dreamed of a storm entering her womb. One way or another, legend had begun. Their child? A boy destined to reshape the world, Terran, the future conqueror. From his first breath, Lysandra vowed to forge him into more than a king. He would be a divine flame. Her marriage to Damarian wasn't a honeyed affair of harp music and roses. It was a fiery convergence of pride, prophecy, and looming betrayals. Damarian, master tactician and collector of wives, wed Lysandra around 357 BCE. She was young, but not naive. She knew the stakes, and she knew her husband. Myratia was a kingdom where ambition bled into violence. Here, cousins poisoned each other over breakfast. Brothers turned into rivals by sundown. But Lysandra entered that world, cloaked in priestess power and steel-eyed intent. She didn't just want a crown. She wanted to shape the bloodline that would wear it. From the outset, cracks formed. Damarian's appetite for new wives never waned. But Lysandra didn't sulk in silence. She formed her own alliances, courted prophets, and shaped her own narrative. Then came Taranond with him, omens. Flames danced around his cradle. Damarian saw a lion in his dreams, guarding Lysandra's womb. Myths aside, what mattered was what people believed. And Lysandra made sure they believed this child wasn't just royal, he was divine. But as Taran grew, Damarian's court darkened. The king married again, this time to a local noblewoman named Kasara. Unlike Lysandra, Kasara was Myratian-born, giving her children a claim some considered purer. This wasn't about love. It was about lineage, a threat to Terran's future. Lysandra knew the stakes. The palace wasn't a sanctuary. It was a battleground with velvet curtains. She used her old tool snakes, dreams, and ancient rituals not just to survive, but to dominate. As the royal household spiraled into backhanded toasts and weaponized gossip, Lysandra stayed sharp. Damarian, distant and distracted, listened to flatterers and generals instead of his own wife. The final insult? Kasara's uncle, General Mirren, mocking Lysandra and Taran during a drunken feast, calling Taran illegitimate, a child of myths, not of Damarian's blood. Big mistake. Lysandra leaned into the myth. Let them believe Taran was born of thunder. It made him untouchable. But she didn't stay for the fallout. She returned to her homeland, Eperea. Not in defeat, but in calculated retreat. There, she plotted, whispered, and waited. Then history cracked open. King Damarian was assassinated at a wedding, no less, on the very eve of his grand Persian campaign. No one knew who did it. A scorned guard? Court intrigue? Tehran? Or dare they whisper it, Lysandra? They couldn't prove it, but they believed it, especially when Cassara and her newborn child were dead within days. Some said Lysandra had the queen forced to hang herself after watching her infant tossed into a pyre. Others said she slit the child's throat herself. What's certain? She made it personal. She made it final. To Lysandra, a rival child wasn't a baby. It was a future war, and she was done being soft. With Cassara's bloodline erased, she turned to the real game, securing Tehran's crown. Her son still a teen, but already sharpened by war tutors, and Aristotle himself was proclaimed king. But behind every signature and speech was Lysandra. She threatened generals, bribed nobles, and removed enemies with subtlety or steel. Tehran didn't always agree, reportedly mourned the violence against Cassara's family, but he didn't stop her, because he knew what his mother had always known: power drinks blood. As Tehran set his sights eastward, Lysandra faded from the limelight, but not from the game. She became the spirit behind the throne, cloaked in incense and influence. She sent relics, performed rituals, and spoke with oracles. To her, Tehran wasn't waging war, he was fulfilling divine purpose. And she was the guardian of that prophecy. She didn't wear the crown. She didn't need to. In Myratia, she ruled with whispers. Officially, the regent was the general Antivara stoic man loyal to Tehran, but Lysandra undermined him at every step. She stirred dissent in Epirrea and Thessalonia, whispering secrets that made swords twitch. Her letters to Tehran grew sharper. She warned him of Antivara's ambitions, comparing him to Damarion too clever, too proud, and possibly plotting. Whether she truly believed it or not, she kept the pressure on, and Tehran, thousands of miles away, kept reading. Tehran hesitated. He needed General Calis cult, calculating Callisto hold the fractured regions of the west while he waged war in the east. And so the quiet storm that had been brewing between Lysandra and the aging general split wide open. She watched. She waited. But beneath her silk robes and motherly mask, a fire smoldered. She had endured palace bloodshed and divine omens. She had not, however, survived all that just to bow before a man with scars and no vision. As Tehran's empire sprawled from the Jade Sea to the mountains of Sol, Lysandra saw cracks, dangerous ones. Her son was losing himself in trusting foreign minds, wearing strange clothes, muttering philosophies not born of their gods. She believed his greatness flowed from divine favor and from her. And if he forgot that, well, she knew how to wake kings from dreams, even kings she birthed. Then came the thunderbolt. News reached them like a whisper wrapped around a blade. Tehran was dead, not slain in glory, not crowned in fire, but collapsed in Babylon suddenly, and without leaving order behind. For Lysandra, it wasn't just grief. It was the erasure of everything she had built. Her son, her living prophecy, the storm made flesh gone, and in his place, chaos. Generals circled like vultures. His realm cracked like glass under a boot. Calis still held sway over the western realms, and he held no love for the Serpent Queen. Worse, Tehran's sister, Callista, was being courted by power-hungry lords who saw her bloodline as currency. Civil war wasn't a threat. It was guaranteed. But Lysandra wasn't helpless. She didn't have her son, but she had his legacy, his heir, the infant boy born to Princess Rohana, the mountain-blooded wife Tehran had taken during his campaigns. Rohana was in hiding, the child even more so fragile, small, and the last true flicker of divine fire. To some, a symbol. To others, a target. To Lysandra, a weapon. She aligned with Rohana, swearing to protect the boy Aryan, future flame of the realm. But the old loyalties were fading. The men who once trembled before Tehran's command now marched with ambition, not unity. Lysandra, undaunted, began to move. Her old enemy Calis died, and his cold-hearted son Cassar stepped into power, deadlier, more calculating, and allergic to queens with ambition. The stage was set. On one side, Lysandra coiled, burning with divine purpose. On the other, Kasser cold steel and measured cruelty. Taran was gone, but the war for his shadow had only just begun. Years after Taran's death, while the empire he built crumbled, Lysandra made her boldest play yet. She returned not as a mourning mother, but as a storm cloaked in prophecy. The realm was fractured. Rohanna and young Ariane were prisoners, and Lysandra saw the final hour closing. So she struck a pact with Lord Palion, one of the last generals, with a shred of loyalty to the old blood. In exchange for her backing, he offered his army. And with that army, Lysandra re-entered Myrasaya, her sandals tracing the soil like the return of a goddess. The realm shuddered. Towns opened their gates. Troops deserted Kasser. Her name alone had weight. Her vengeance? Swift. Precise. She hunted Kasser's supporters one by one. When she captured Philip Ardenthe, dim-witted half-brother once installed as puppet king, she had him executed. His wife, Lady Soraya, refused to take her own life. So Lysandra had her strangled, wrapped in silks that made the act seem like ceremony. Her message was clear. Only the blood of Taran would rule. Everyone else? Pretenders. For one glorious moment, the realm bowed to her. She had avenged the past. She had restored the flame, but power in Maracia was like wildfire, and Kasser returned richer, readier, and ruthless. Her allies vanished. Palion lost favor. The tides shifted. Lysandra, now confined to the fortress of Pendra, watched from stone battlements as the storm closed in. The Serpent Queen was surrounded, but she did not grovel. She did not plead. For nearly a year she endured the siege like a statue carved from vengeance. Food vanished. Illness spread. Friends evaporated. Still she walked the halls like a priestess in a templum-bed, eyes glowing with fury and faith. Kasser hesitated. Killing her meant risking legend. She was still the mother of Taran the Divine, still wrapped in stories. So he offered terms: surrender and live. She knew better. Promises from kings meant nothing. Hunger had become death. Her fortress broke. Her defenders laid down arms. Lysandra, proud to the final hour, was surrendered. But Kasser didn't soil his hands. He handed her to the grieving families of those she had executed. Let them decide. They did. Her death was decreed. But when they came for her, no one dared swing the blade. She stood silent, regal, a woman of ritual and rage, eyes cutting through men like prophecy. They remembered her visions, her serpents, her son. They had chanted his name. Now they couldn't move. So Kasser brought outsiders, mercenaries, foreign blades, men who knew only orders, not legacy. And that is how Lysandra Priestess, Mother of Kings, Serpent Queen was finally struck down. Not with song, not with dignity, but with silence. Her death ended the bloodline of Taran in any real claim to power. The divine fire flickered, then faded, but the shadow she left behind never left. Lysandra didn't die a queen. She died a ghost. But history, as ever, is strange. It forgets those who die quietly, but it never forgets those who fall hissing. She was never meant for gentle pages of peace. She wielded motherhood like a dagger and divinity like a throne. Without her, there is no myth of the storm-born conqueror, no legacy built on thunder and blood. Lysandra didn't just give life to an empire, she shielded it with fire. Among ancient rulers, her legacy is singular. She didn't command battalions or lead cavalry. Her war was waged with symbols, secrets, and silent prayers. She understood fear. She understood belief. She made an entire kingdom believe her son was destined to rule the Star Sand. Perhaps, in the end, she believed it too. Her enemies called her a sorceress, a schemer, a murderer. They were right, and yet, so was she. She was a force of her time where mercy was weakness, and queens had to wear fangs. In the centuries that followed, her name echoed in both curses and reverence. Some called her a villain, others a visionary, but none dared call her irrelevant. She haunted the myth of Taran like incense clinging to ancient altars, always there, always unseen. And maybe that was the point. She ended exactly where she was always meant toached, not as a mourning mother in a hero's shadow, but as a legend in her own right. The woman who wore prophecy like armor, who lay beside serpents and defied gods. Lysandra may have long since turned to dust, but her story survives whispered in every tale of ruthless queens, in every dynasty built on divine blood, and in every myth where ambition slithers through the dark. And speaking of myths, off the sunburned coast of modern Heralian, on the island of Kiris, lies a ruin so surreal it feels more dream than built. The corridors curl like vines, rooms split and reconnect like riddles, and staircases spiral into dead ends. Even today, explorers get turned around. This is Karanisti, ancient seat of the Marnayans, and the likely root of one of humanity's most enduring tales, the Labyrinth of the Horned One. But before the monster, there was a masterpiece. Built around 1900 BCE and continually expanded, Koronis wasn't just a palace, it was a city under a roof. Spanning more than 150,000 square feet, it housed over 1,000 rooms, shrines, granaries, artisan quarters, ceremonial halls, and what might be the earliest toilets to ever flush. Multi-story buildings, airflow systems, and an almost magical waterworks network made it a place of engineering brilliance. To modern scholars, it's intricate chaos. To those who first walked its halls, it must have felt like sorcery. British archaeologist Edwin Mallory brought Koronis into modern focus in the early 20th century. Convinced he'd found the source of the labyrinth myth, he unearthed bull imagery everywhere, painted on plaster, carved into stones, molded into charms. The bull, it turns out, wasn't just a symbol. It was sacred to the Marnayans. So sacred, Mallory even named the civilization after its mythical ruler king, Karen, the Horned Sovereign. But here's the twist. No one's found a literal labyrinth. No underground maze. No dungeons. No creature with a man's body and a bull's head. What we have instead is more Hontinga Palace designed in loops and spirals, purposefully difficult to navigate. It wasn't a prison for monsters. It was something stranger, a structure built to blur the lines between logic and lore. So, was the creature born from the walls? Or were the walls the creature all along? The myth is iconic. A monstrous horned man trapped in a maze so complex, none who entered returned. Only Ariston, the daring prince of Athens, managed to slay the beast and escape guided by a thread given to him by the clever Princess Serapha. But where did it come from? And why a maze? The earliest legends speak of King Haron, a mighty ruler who demanded a strange annual tribute from Athens. 7 boys and 7 girls, sacrificed to appease the beast he kept hidden deep in the earth. The Horned One, born from divine punishment and royal disgrace, became a metaphor of power's dark side, of the savage truth beneath golden thrones. To ancient Greeks, Kiris was exotic, terrifying, rich. Its people, the Marnayans, were seafarers with strange rituals, complex art, and sprawling palaces that made Athenian homes look like hovels. Their culture was alien. Bulls leapt through frescoes, goddesses bared their chests, and the air itself seemed to shimmer with meaning. Imagine a mainlander stepping into Koronis for the first time. The ceilings rose and twisted. The rooms circled back on themselves, bull horn stylized and sacred adorned altars. And everywhere, the echo of something primal hummed beneath the stones. The bull wasn't feared, it was revered. The famous fresco of bull-leaping men and women flipping midair over a charging bull wasn't sport. It was likely ritual, a dance of danger, grace, and transcendence. Put all of that together, maze-like corridors, sacred bulls, and a palace unlike anything seen before, and you get the ingredients of a myth. But some believe the tale's roots dig deeper than culture, they stretch into memory. One theory suggests that the myth of the labyrinth reflects a time when Kiris dominated Athens, demanding tribute and submission. The maze becomes political entrapment. The Horned One, the brute force of imperial rule. Another view is more internal. The maze is the human mind. The Minotaur, our buried instincts. Ariston is the part of us that dares to face it, guided by the fragile thread of memory. Whatever the origin, the story, and the structure are forever entwined. Before Athens carved marble into temples, before Sparta drilled boys into soldiers, the Marnians thrived, not with swords but with ships, spices, and stories. Their empire was built on trade and transformation. Carones was their crown jewel. They didn't conquer, they connected. They reached across seas to Egypt, the Levant, even Spain. Their pottery, saffron, and bronze wares flowed like tides. And unlike later Greeks, their art didn't glorify war, it glorified life. Dolphins danced along walls. Priestesses held snakes, not swords. Their goddesses weren't remote, they were alive. Bare-breasted, fierce, and present. At the center of this soft power, Carones. It had no defensive walls suggesting either confidence or divine arrogance. Its design was deliberate, layered, a fusion of earth and air. Rainwater slipped through clay channels. Air moved naturally through vertical shafts. Their architecture whispered knowledge we've only recently begun to understand. But their words, still locked in silence. Their script called linear remains undeciphered. We don't know what they called themselves, what they feared, what they prayed for. Their thoughts are sealed in symbols no one has yet broken. All we have is the art, the bones of a palace, and the myth that grew like ivy through its halls. Carones wasn't just a building. It was a soul made of stone. To walk its winding halls today is to walk through time itself layered, bewildering, luminous. Corridors twist like questions. Light wells stab the darkness. Stairs disappear or lead to sun-kissed courtyards that weren't there a moment ago. It feels intentional, like the building is testing you. Rooms sprawl outward, upwards, over 1,000 in total. Storage chambers, workshops, private apartments, sacred halls, all spiraling around a grand central court, perhaps the stage for ceremonies or bloodless bull dances. Some levels rise 4 or 5 stories, built not for grandeur, but for purpose. Yet, it still confuses, still bewilders, as if the palace itself wanted to be remembered as something more, something alive. Their ventilation? Genius. They cooled air without machines. They flushed waste before Rome thought to. They mastered comfort before anyone called it civilization. The so-called throne room remains iconic, an alabaster seat flanked by benches and walls painted with griffins, creatures of myth, guarding silence. Was it the chamber of a priest king? A goddess's sanctum? A tribunal? We don't know. But the walls whisper. Dolphins above bathing pools. Women with layered skirts, breasts bare, eyes confident. Youths caught mid-vault over bulls. It wasn't art. It was identity. Still, the deeper you wander, the stranger it becomes. Some areas seem crafted to confuse. Maybe that's the real root of the labyrinth tale. Not a prison for beasts, but a living ritual space that stirred awe, reverence, and just enough fear. No traps, no chains, just a place that made you question where you were and what was waiting around the next bend. Carones wasn't just the center of an empire. It was the sacred rhythm of a people. Its walls don't boast power, they radiate belief. The spiritual wasn't shown in towering columns or epic hymns. It was built into the foundation. Shrines tucked into quiet corners, pillars rising like forest trunks, bullhorns crowned rooftops, and altars like echoes of thunder. The bull wasn't a monster. It was memory. It was God. Even the famed bull-leaping fresco wasn't entertainment. It was communion, flesh and fury, a dance with danger that transcended the physical. Imagine a sacred theater not for mortals, but for gods. A stage of stone and silence. That's what Carones was. The famed fresco of bull-leaping wasn't mere spectacle. It was a ritual ballet offering, a metaphor for humanity's eternal dance with chaos. And then there were the serpents. Hidden in the palace's storage chambers, archaeologists uncovered something extraordinary. Figurines now known as the snake priestesses. Bare-chested, arms raised, serpents coiled around them like divine threads. These weren't passive icons. They radiated defiance, mystery, and protection. Guardians of hearth and birth, life and rebirth. To the Marnians, snakes weren't threats. They were sacred symbols of change, creatures of earth, shadow, and secret wisdom. The chambers where these statues were found whisper of private altars, household shrines, places where daily life bowed gently toward the divine. And when you begin to connect the serpents, the bulls, the winding hallways, and hidden sanctuaries, Koronis transforms in your mind's eye. It wasn't merely a palace. It was a ritual Enginean architectural invocation. No need for a towering temple of marble. The palace was the temple. The walls prayed in pigments. The floor plans were psalms. In this world, myth and reality weren't opposites. They were neighbors. Koronis didn't just house royalty, it housed divinity. For centuries, it stood at the heart of a luminous civilization. The Marnayans ruled not with swords, but through spirit, sea, and sheer creativity. But then, something broke. Something sudden. Something silent. By 1400 BCE, the palace was abandoned. Its murals left to crumble. The empire that once ruled the waves vanished, like mist beneath sunrise. Why? No one can say for sure. One theory points to the wrath of nature. Around 1600 BCE, a volcanic cataclysm erupted from Theranos, modern-day Santorin. The explosion was apocalyptic. Tsunamis may have pummeled Kiras's shores. Ash poisoned the skies. Crops failed. Hope faded. Koronis wasn't destroyed overnight, but the aftershocks may have shattered its foundation, economically, spiritually, politically. Others point to war. By 1450 BCE, a new force rose from the mainland, the Mycenaeans. Fiercer, more martial, more pragmatic. They didn't just attack, they absorbed, slowly, through trade, then influence. Eventually, through occupation, the palace was re-inhabited, but it had changed. Its voice was different. Art turned rigid. The elegant fluidity of Marnai culture stiffened into symbols of conquest. Their script linea A was replaced by the clunky linea B, used by Mycenaean scribes. The soul of the place dimmed. Koronis had become a myth while still standing. Yet no signs of violent collapse remained. No charred bones, no slaughtered refugees. It didn't fall in fire, it faded. The people stopped painting. The gods stopped whispering. And nature returned to claim the corridors. By the time poets like Helion sang of Kairos, Koronis was already legend. Its name mingled with tales of horned kings and mazes that consumed hope. Maybe that's fitting. Because what killed it wasn't disaster or sword. It was time. But time forgets slowly, and stones remember. For over 3,000 years, Koronis slept beneath earth and olive grove, until a man with a flair for story and a pickaxe in hand changed everything. His name was Sir Edwin Mallory. He wasn't just an archaeologist. He was a romantic, armed with Homer in one pocket and a dream in the other. In 1900, he bought a patch of farmland where villagers kept digging up strange seals. Mallory started digging. What he uncovered rewrote history. A palace so complex, so advanced, and so surreal that he was sure this was the labyrinth. This was the lost world of King Karan and his divine beast. He named the people Marnayans, after myth. He gave meaning to the frescoes, the altars, the stones. Sometimes right, sometimes wrong, and always dramatically. He restored parts of the site with Concretian act historians still debate. Was he a visionary, giving us back a ghost of the past, or a vandal, muddying what time had preserved? Either way, he did what no one else dared. He made the ancient world feel alive again. Through his work, Europe glimpsed a civilization older than Athens, older than Sparta, a civilization that valued art, movement, and beauty over blood. A people who left behind not myths but something deeper. Symbols, not stories. Koronis didn't give us a Rosetta Stone. Linea A remains unread. So instead of reading their thoughts, we see them, painted on walls, etched into clay, carved into memory. And what we see is different. No warriors, no battle processions. Instead, dolphins arcing over bathtubs, birds in flight, young men and women dancing, leaping, living. The Marnayans didn't worship war. They worshipped balance. The double axelabrosappers everywhere, not as a weapon, but a symbol, maybe divine, maybe feminine, maybe celestial. Some scholars even suggest the word labyrinth means house of the Labros, not a trap, a temple. And the bull horns? They rise from altars like echoes of thunder, markers of sacred space, guardians of the unseen. Even the palace's layout may hold cosmic meaning. Some think the spiral design mirrors the cycles of life and death, the underworld, the soul's journey, a ritual maze, not a monster's prison. But without their voice, without their language, we don't know. We feel. That's what Coronis does. It haunts the space between knowledge and wonder. Walk its paths, and you're walking through more than stone. You're tracing questions. Every turn asks something. Every shadow waits. Thousands of years later, the ruin still moves people. Tourists get lost in its layers. Scholars scrape for answers. Writers like us follow threads into myth. The Minotaur? A legend. But the feeling of the labyrinth? Absolutely real. We don't know the names of Coronis' rulers, or their priests, or what vows they made in moonlight. But we know they felt. They danced. They painted. They breathed a kind of magic into stone. They were the first. Before the Parthenon. Before Roman arches. Before the Torah or Zoroaster's flame, there was this place. A city that was also a temple. A temple that told a story etched in loops and echoes. Because maybe the labyrinth was never meant to trap you. Maybe it was built to change you. At first, siege warfare was little more than organized chaos teams of soldiers wielding tree trunks like oversized clubs, smashing away at walls as if chopping down history itself. But soon, destruction got an upgrade. The ram evolved. Engineers realized that mounting a log within a wheeled frame, often cloaked in a roof, to shield against arrows, fire, and the occasional insult, transformed a crude tool into a monster. A machine not just of brute force, but of sheer terror. Enter the Assyrian siege warfare's mad geniuses. These ancient tacticians didn't just use rams, they weaponized fear. Their siege towers were nightmares on wheels, combining battering arms with archer nests. Imagine it, gates being pounded into splinters while your defenders are lit up by a rain of arrows. Welcome to Nineveh's version of hell. Carvings from that ancient city show monstrous rams, their tips sheathed in iron, rolling slowly toward enemy walls like doom made mechanical. And they weren't just aimed at gates. Rams brought down towers, breached weak walls, and leveled defenses. Seeing one meant two choices: surrender or watch your city crack like dry clay. The Greeks streamlined them. The Romans took it to another level. Roman engineers built siege beasts, called Ares Latin, for rams suspended on chains or ropes within massive rolling shelters. Some were so enormous they required platoons of soldiers to swing. The rhythm of a fully engaged ram wasn't just physical, it was psychological. Boom, boom, boom. Thunder made of timber and hate. But for all their glory, rams needed unity. Dozens of soldiers swinging in rhythm, shielding themselves from boiling pitch, fireballs, and whatever refuse the enemy could hurl from above. If the timing failed, the ram stalled, and a stalled ram was a death sentence. Still, when a ram worked, it really worked. Timber versus stone, old school physics, a concert of impact. But that was just the overture. Because if the ram was the brawler, then the catapult was the schemer. Catapults changed the rules. No more hand-to-wall combat. This was destruction from a distance, gravity, and terror served together. The earliest catapults emerged in the Greek world in the 4th century BCE, not from warriors, but from thinkers. Engineers who realized that the universe itself could be twisted into a weapon. Under the command of Dionysius of Syracuse, a tyrant with a love for violent innovation, the first torsion catapults were born. Powered by twisted sinew or hair, they stored terrifying energy in their coiled guts. These weren't oversized slingshots. They were precision-engineered horror devices. The brilliance? Tension. By coiling animal sinew, engineers created a spring-loaded monster. Release the tension, and stones? Bolt 7 flaming payloads soared hundreds of meters. The two main types rose fast: the ballista, which fired bolts like a colossal crossbow, and the stone-hurling catapult that lobbed boulders over defenses. Then came Rome masters of improvement. Roman catapults were modular, portable, and terrifyingly efficient. They could be hauled, rebuilt, and fired in hours. Some fired 60-pound stones with such force they splintered wood, shattered battlements, and occasionally vaporized anyone standing in the wrong place. But catapults weren't just about physics, they were about drama. Some commanders used them to deliver psychological body blows, corpses hurled over walls to spread panic, severed heads flung into town squares like grotesque calling cards. Even disease-ridden bodies were launched, centuries before anyone knew the word germ. Still, catapults had limits. They were heavy, terrain-sensitive, and demanded trained crews. A great catapult could win a siege. A poorly placed one could sink a campaign. But just when cities thought things couldn't get worse, the trebuchet arrived. If catapults whispered chaos, trebuchets roared it. Massive, deliberate, and frighteningly beautiful, the trebuchet was siege warfare's crown jewel. When one showed up on the horizon, it wasn't just a threat, it was a declaration. Your walls? Meaningless. Unlike its twisted cord cousins, the trebuchet used something even older: gravity. At its heart, a long arm sat atop a sturdy frame. One end held a massive counterweight. The other cradled a sling. Raise the weight. Let it fall. The arm snapped down, flinging its payload high and far. Not random, not chaotic. Elegant annihilation. The first traction trebuchets came from ancient China, 4th century BCE. But the counterweight variant, the one that would shatter medieval strongholds, likely spread via Byzantine or Islamic innovations in the 12th century. And when Europe got hold of it, game over. The mightiest of these monsters could hurl 300-pound stones over 300 meters. Imagine furniture-sized boulders crashing into towers. Entire sections of walls crumbled. Morale plummeted. But the arc that was the genius. Unlike catapults, trebuchets could lob over walls with grace. No longer did defenders feel safe inside, because now the sky was falling. They flung everything: rocks, pitch, diseased animals, even lime powder to blind archers, messages wrapped around stones, sarcastic notes, threats. One legend tells of Warwolf, a trebuchet built during the siege of Stirling Castle in Scotland. It was so massive, so terrifying, the defenders surrendered before it even fired. The king refused the surrender, he wanted to see it work. Trebuchets weren't quick. They took hours to construct, minutes to reload, and whole teams to operate. But nothing combined terror, range, and power so completely. Then came siege tower siege warfare's blunt answer to subtlety. Where rams charged gates and trebuchets rained fire from the sky, siege towers came straight at your soul. Picture a wooden skyscraper on wheels, covered in wet hides to resist fire, crawling forward under a hailstorm of arrows. On top, archers and spear-wielding troops ready to leap into your walls. A moving fortress, a mobile invasion. When one of those towering beasts started rolling toward your city, rattling with shields, shouts, and destiny, you knew the battle was no longer coming, it was here. Siege towers weren't instruments of stealth. They were declarations lumbering giants that signaled the start of real warfare. The Assyrians likely pioneered them back in the 9th century BCE, but it was the Greeks and later, the brilliant lunatics of the Hellenistic empires who made them epic. During the siege of Rhodes in 305 BCE, the Macedonian commander Demetrian, known to his enemies as the Wallbreaker, built a tower so colossal they named it the City Taker. Standing over 100 feet tall, plated in iron, bristling with catapults, and powered by thousands of soldiers, it was a skyscraper with an attitude. Unfortunately, it was also too heavy. It buckled under its own ambition. But the message? Unforgettable. The logic was simple. Walls are only useful if attackers can't climb them. Siege towers made height irrelevant. From their lofty decks, archers rained down havoc while infantry on lower levels prepared to storm the battlements. Once the drawbridge dropped, It was over an iron kiss from death itself. Of course, they weren't invincible. Siege towers were slow, hard to steer, and ridiculously flammable. Defenders would dig trenches, flood moats, or raise secondary barriers to thwart their crawl. A well-aimed fire arrow could turn a masterpiece into a bonfire, but when they worked, the effect was terrifying. 1 second, your walls were solid. The next, they were crawling with invaders who seemed to descend from the clouds. Siege towers didn't just attack, they changed the rules. They turned war into a 3-dimensional nightmare, where height became hazard, and every footstep echoed toward doom. But while towers rolled and rams smashed, some of the deadliest siege tactics happened in total silence underground. This was sapping, or siege tunneling, the darkest trick in fortress warfare, and it was as eerie as it was effective. The plan? Dig beneath the enemy's wall. Hold the ceiling up with wooden beams. Then, once you're in position, set it all on fire. When the supports collapse, the tunnel implodes, and so does the wall above it. No clash of steel, no thunderous charge, just earth opening like a mouth, and your defenses crumbling into memory. The Assyrians may have tried early forms of it, but the real artists of destruction were the Greeks, Persians, and medieval siege engineers. During the siege of Plataea in 429 BCE, Spartan diggers tried to undermine the city walls, only to run straight into Athenian counter-diggers. The result? Underground knife fights in pitch black, lit by torches, fought in tunnels barely wider than a coffin. It was called countermining. It added a ghost story layer to war. Soldiers digging blindly in the dark, listening for enemy picks, knowing a wall of dirt and possibly a blade could burst through at any second. There was no glory down there, just sweat, darkness, and suffocating fear. But when undermining succeeded, it was apocalyptic. In 1212, during the siege of Rochester Castle, King Jorn's men dug beneath the southern tower. They packed the mine with pig fat, flammable, greasy, and symbolic in its own grotesque way. When lit, the supports gave way, and the tower collapsed. Shocked defenders surrendered soon after. By the 13th century, tunneling had become an exact science. Siege engineers were part demolition expert, part geologist. They studied soil, calculated stress points, and picked the exact inch to collapse. It was patient, dirty, and brilliant hand. It proved one thing: if you couldn't go over a wall or through it, you could always go under. But defenders didn't just sit and pray. They had tricks, some creative, some horrifying. Let's start with the scariest: Greek fire. This Byzantine invention, first seen around the 7th century CE, was less a weapon and more a nightmare. It clung to skin, sails, armor, and kept burning on water. Sprayed from siphons or tossed in breakable pots, it created chaos on an industrial scale. Its formula was so secret it died with the empire, but its legend? Eternal. A single burst could incinerate a ship. An entire fleet could vanish in minutes, and no one truly knows what it was. Oil? Sulfur? Alchemy? When the Greeks weren't hurling elemental hellfire, they turned to more humble tools: boiling liquids. Boiling oil was particularly nasty. Unlike water, it soaked into armor, clothing, and skin, then ignited. Imagine climbing a siege ladder only to be drenched in fire you can't shake off. Hot sand, though less flashy, was vicious. It found the cracks in your armor, your neck. Your ricin burned into your flesh like a brand. You couldn't stop it. You just screamed. Even gravity was weaponized. Huge stones, tree trunks, even dead livestock were dropped from towers. Not just to kill, but to crush siege engines, shatter morale, and paint the battlefield in psychological dread. And then there were the traps. Spiked pits hidden beneath leaves, bridges that collapsed on cue, barricades that forced attackers into kill zones. Castles were puzzles, and the wrong answer meant agony. Why all this effort? Because time was the defender's secret ally. Every minute that the walls held, the besiegers grew weaker. Food ran short. Disease spread. Reinforcements might arrive. Siege warfare wasn't about overwhelming power. It was about endurance, about bleeding the enemy dry while staying just alive enough to smile when the gates finally held. It wasn't just destruction, it was domination. A psychological war that played out before the first brick fell. Siege engines were the drama, the smoke, the thunder. But the real goal? To make the defenders believe there was no escape. To crack their will before you cracked their walls. A massive stone arcs through the air, launched by a war beast taller than your house. And everyone behind the city walls thinks the same terrifying thought. We are not safe. That was the message of every trebuchet launch. Every creaking beam, every groaning rope. Siege was not just war, it was theater. And fear was the headliner. Ancient commanders knew this. The Assyrians didn't just drag their siege engines across deserts, they did it with parades. Roman legions would set up camps within plain view of their targets, letting defenders watch, helpless, as rams were assembled and catapults calibrated. It was intimidation, hour by hour, bolt by bolt. Sometimes the projectiles themselves delivered messages. Severed heads of generals and diplomats still in their armor would soar over the walls and land with finality. In Constantinople, the Byzantine defenders weren't just pelted with rocks. They were bombarded with the dead-rotting bodies flung into the city to sow disease and dread. And in the Mongol siege of Kaffa in 1346, that wasn't just horror, it was history. Plague-ridden corpses were catapulted over the walls. Some historians believe it helped ignite the Black Death across Europe. When a trebuchet rolled into view, it didn't whisper, it thundered. You'd hear it before you saw it. The slow clank of gears, the groan of wood under tension, the heavy thud of the counterweight slamming down like the heartbeat of doom. And then silence, the most dangerous sound of all. Was it reloading, re-aiming, or something new entirely? That silence, it broke men faster than fire. Siege warfare wasn't just about bricks and battlements. It was about mines. Break those, and walls fall all by themselves. The goal wasn't always destruction, it was surrender. To make defenders believe the gods had left them. That resistance was suicide. That opening the gates was mercy. Because in siege warfare, sometimes the walls stood strong, while the hearts behind them crumbled. And then came gunpowder. In the late medieval era, the rumble of trebuchets faded beneath the roar of cannons. The age of elegant destruction gave way to brutal physics. Suddenly, all the genius of ancient engineers, their rams, towers, tunnels was obsolete. Castles once seen as eternal crumbled in minutes beneath iron shot. One cannon, one hit, one hole. Centuries of stone undone in seconds. By the 15th century, Europe's strongholds were already fossils beautiful but doomed. Their tall towers became bullseyes. Their crenellations offered no protection against thunderous barrages. But the end of an age didn't mean the end of its ideas. Because siege logic didn't die. It evolved. Modern artillery from tanks to missile silos still follows ancient rules. It's all trajectory, tension, and force. Only the materials changed. The mission? Same as it ever was. Break the unbreakable from a safe distance, with the universe's own math as your weapon. Even our minds haven't moved on. Shock and awe? That's a siege tactic. Make the enemy feel defeated before you've even fired a shot. The battering rams with banners, the trebuchets with thunderous cadence, the parade of power. All of it lives on in tanks, airstrikes, and live-stream dominance. You can still see their ghosts. At Masada, where the Roman siege ramp scars the desert like a wound that won't close. In Constantinople, where the layered walls stood for 1,000 years until a cannon crushed them. In crumbling fortresses across Europe, where rounded towers and sloped bastions whisper tales of adaptation and desperation. And today, we're still under siege. Not by wood and rope, but by wires and code. Firewalls instead of stone walls. Cyber blockades instead of moats. Drones instead of trebuchets. Yet the dance remains. Someone outside wants in. Someone inside wants them out. And both are prepared to wait, to build, and to break. The rams are gone. The war wolves are retired. The trebuchets rest in museums. But siege warfare? Siege spirit? Alive, watching, waiting. And just like before, it's only a matter of time before someone finds a new way to knock on the gates.